Yeah, as John introduced, my name is Harshad Sambamurphy. I'm originally from Chennai, in south of India, but grew up for a majority of my life in Singapore, along with 2 years spent in Geneva. Now, I'm sure that a lot of us growing up, maybe even now, have idols that we look up to, that we aspire to be like, that we're inspired by. Maybe sports athletes, musicians, or maybe even someone from the big screen. Now, in India, cinema is big. Bollywood is huge. Where I'm from, it's called Hollywood. I'm not entirely sure why, but the movie's great. There are clips on YouTube of these Tamil movies where the hero can do anything. Jump 10 meters across, bash a villain and make him go flying in the air. Worst comes to worst, the hero can even fly. Not a problem. And then suddenly everyone just breaks out into this dance routine completely congruent to the previous fight scene. So growing up, I would get so caught up in this. Me and my younger brother, we'd enact fight scenes, hero and the villain. Highly immature. It was great fun. So one of my favorite heroes was a man named Rajnikant. He was originally a bus conductor, but was given the opportunity to star in a film, primarily as a villain, then made it big as a hero, and is now in my state referred to as superstar. In the public's eyes, he's a god. He's put up on this pedestal, and people respect him so much, it's almost close to worship. I grew up watching a lot of his movies, and I'm one major fan. I still do watch his movies. He was one of my inspirations and influences growing up. Similarly, reading about these individuals can have a deeper and more profound impact, and that's what I'd like to speak about today, the power of individuality and the written word. So this is a personal story. I want to give you a personal account on why individuality is important. Growing up, I wasn't much of a reader. I thought I was, so I bought a lot of books, only for the rest of the household to read them, except me. I was also exposed to a lot of old school rock music, something that my father had grown up with, Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, Doors, Queen, SNG, ABBA, you name it. I also enjoyed my fair share of rap music, but of course this was banned from the family stereo due to explicit language. Now, coming into university, I've had the privilege of meeting some wonderful and inspiring people. I was, 2 years ago, more interested in reading than I've ever been in the past, now 22 years of my life. I read copious amounts of books, by my standards at least, being able to finish a book in just about 10 days, which was an achievement in itself. The last time I picked up a book, it took me over 6 months to plow through. Now, the books I read were predominantly all biographies. Biographies on Jimi Hendrix, John Lennon, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin. These were all the musical biographies I was reading at the time, learning on how they wrote their songs, what it meant, their relationships, the drugs, the sex, the life, the death, everything. So these were some of my idols, and reading about them, I began to feel like them. I wanted to be more like them. Now, a good book can bring about the power of the language and the written word. The writer creates this world that we as readers are transported into and makes us believe in that story. I was reading about powerful individuals who had an impact on society all over. Now, when someone like me reads a great biography on such extraordinary people, the impact is instantaneous. It's incredible, it's absolutely tremendous. There was an inkling within me which magnified tenfold to push me to be like these people, to be exactly like them. Throughout this time, I could never quite distinguish between being inspired by someone and morphing into someone. Like John Lennon, I thought I would take up smoking, songwriting, and be a bit more confident in the way I approach things. I thought being a rebel was a great idea. Jimi Hendrix played the guitar and died at the age of 27. I thought, wait a second, I play the guitar. Maybe I'm on the road to stardom and, God forbid, die at the age of 27. These biographies were so well written, and me, being the blind fan of music that I was, and even am today, wanted to know more about these people's lives, what they did, and basically copy them. I wanted to be exactly like them. I even bought skinny jeans for the first time then. Before that, I was in my hip hop phase. Chains, bracelets, and trousers 2 sizes too big. So moving on from here, I started reading about political figures. I read about Gandhi. I read his autobiography as well as his biography. I learned of his ups and downs, his strengths and weaknesses, India's journey to freedom, as well as his life in general. Now, Gandhi carried out experiments on himself to seek out the truth. After reading about this, I started to conduct experiments of my own on myself. I began to think becoming a fruitarian was something worthwhile. I kept experimenting and changing my diet regimes, experimented with how much I ate and what I ate. I'm someone that enjoys eating. I eat considerable amount, I'm not going to lie. But after reading this biography, and others consequently, I started to constrain my eating habits. Gandhi taught me a lot on peace and non-violence, but this book also changed the way I looked at food and how much I spent on food. Moving on from here, I started to read about and wanted to know more about a new subject, and this was communism. I was reading about communist leaders such as Che Guevara, Fidel Castro, Mao, Pol Pot, Karl Marx, and somehow finding his way into this collection of communist literature was Abraham Lincoln, but that's another story. Now these books on communism, beginning with Che, were all very well written. The power of the language and written word was so strong for me that I, for a brief period of time, identified with this. And by brief here I mean months. I identified with communist ideals. All I did was focus on getting a better understanding of communism, the communist leaders of the past, what they did, and all the treacheries that they had committed. I began with Che, moving on to Fidel, Mao, Pol Pot, Karl Marx, all teaching me and giving me a better understanding on communism, the bourgeoisie, the proletariat. I used to ask myself, why am I not living like a proletariat? Why should I be part of this whole notion of the bourgeoisie? I became extremely stingy. I began curbing what I spent money on. I started to prioritize books, other material goods, and exercise over food. I ate simply and plainly. Now these biographies, they were so well written that I didn't want anything more but to delve more and more into communism. So much so that I would sometimes find myself in class writing poetry on how I was a communist, with communist ideals, and was a leftist. I was simple. Che Guevara wrote poetry, and after reading about this is when I started to write poetry. The fact that certain people like Mao would face extreme weather to exercise made me push myself to go out for a run, sometimes 6 times a week, for months on end. Exercise became a bit of an obsession. Now, I'm from the tropics, equatorial Singapore. Weather like this is frighteningly cold. But back then it did not matter how cold it was, I just did it. This resulted in me losing a lot of weight, affecting my grades, my studies, what have you not. So throughout this time, I could never quite distinguish between being inspired by someone and wanting to be exactly like that someone. As time passed, my repertoire of reading expanded and was not limited solely to biographies and biographies on musical and political figures. With that, the obsession also seemed to dissipate. I began to realize that reading about individuals who were in fact powerhouses in modern history had loosened my grasp on my own individuality. I wasn't anymore consumed in trying to be someone that I clearly wasn't. I started to focus on the here and now and let go of this whole notion of trying to be someone else. The power to do what I wanted increased. Individuality became less of a blur. Now, I'm sure we've all been through such phases, being idealists, being what one would like to be. But what I'm trying to emphasize here is that the written word can inspire you, it can ignite your imagination and your creativity, but simultaneously, if you're taken unaware and are vulnerable like I was, it can strip you of things which you should hold on to extremely carefully. Being proud of who you are, what you are, your interests, and your image. Now the learning for me has been tremendous in more ways than one, and that's something that I will keep forever. And at the cost of sounding rather cliche, I must admit that I feel this experience has made me, a more mature person. Now we're all different because we're all unique in our own ways. Now we've heard that. Perhaps a number of times from a number of different people, but it's still valid no matter what. And that is to be yourself, to be proud of that, and always seek out your moment of truth. Inspiration can lead you to do many things you once thought of as outside your comfort zone. But as with me, inspiration can also be blurred with imitation. The written word can inspire you, but it should not necessarily dictate you or trample upon your own individuality. As Kurt Cobain once said, wanting to be someone else is a waste of who you really are. Thank you.